Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Lighthouse. I am super excited to be here with Ryan J.A. Murphy. He's climbed the lighthouse, and we're going to have a discussion on what Obsidian really is, data design, knowledge innovation, maybe some screen shares with Ryan's pretty wild home screen. Maybe we look at project management. We look really at what an ITE is all about, integrated thinking environments. And then at the end, we'll turn it over to an AMA for Ryan, where you can ask him anything. And we already have the Q&A open. So go ahead and as the need arises, put your questions in there and you can upvote as well. So with that in mind, what's up, Ryan? How you doing?
Hey, doing good. Getting nervous as that number of participants climbs, but I think that's natural. I didn't realize that you were using this lighthouse metaphor. I might have planned some kind of either way of mocking you or some way of playing with that a bit more, but I like it.
Well, I'm really happy you're here, and I know you have a lot to show us, so I don't want to deprive everyone who's joined. But yeah, where should we start?
With mockery, I think it would be a fun and sort of tasty thing for people to dive right into the home screen that I joked about, because it is kind of goofy. It took a lot of work to set up. It was one of those projects, that just I was procrastinating something more important. So I was playing with what icons I can draw and put on my home screen and how they can work. But I think people will like it, and I think everybody can kind of learn from it. So am I screen sharing from my iPad yet? I don't think I am.
Nope, okay, not from your iPad.
No,
just yet.
I'm trying to. Somebody flip the switch. Give me access. This is the home screen that I was talking about. And if you can't read it, I'll just read out the little icons. This is like a drawing of, the Obsidian graph. And this is all based on Obsidian. I know that wait, is it again, are we saying LYT? Are we saying lit? Are we saying
light or LYT?
Okay, so the LYT community, I know that you are using a variety of apps, but many of you are on Obsidian. I think you could adapt a lot of these ideas to any other kind of integrated thinking environment, as we'll get into it. But the idea here is that if you're on iOS, this is using shortcuts and mostly just like bookmarks on the home screen. But if you're using Android, there should be other ways. I don't know the apps that you can use to generate icons and put them on your home screen, but you can do the same thing and just launch URL schemes from those buttons. But just to read them from the top in case you can't see that text, it's daily notes, wayfinder, books, current book, draft, journal, projects, and current project. Then on the left over here, there's a widget. It's the graph of Obsidian, and you see that opened right up into Obsidian. In the bottom left, it's today's agenda in a widget, and that uses this fancy app called Widget Pack, where you basically draw text down from some text files and then present it on the iPad home screen or the iOS home screen as a list of to-dos. So the to-dos are chat with Nick, and that was our pre-chat at 9:30, and then chat with Nick and other people, that's you guys, at 10. And then at 10:10, Obsidian home screen demo goes perfectly. So I'm excited to take that off later. And then 11, relax, after all this is over and you finished making fun of me. And then if I tap that, it'll jump right into the daily notes button, which is the same thing as I've got up here in the daily notes shortcut. So all of those are kind of fun, but not that complicated. I'll provide a link perhaps in the chat to the way to do the Widget Pack widget. But I think all of that is just kind of for show. The other ones are actually more functional. So the other buttons I've added here are actually, I happened upon this sort of accidentally, and I think it really works. Oh, sorry, Patrick, you're saying, oh no, Patrick, that's right. So you're seeing my home screen on my iPad, and that is a set of buttons that are all actually Obsidian buttons. They're buttons for different functions in Obsidian. Does that make sense? Cool.
And they're beautiful, by the way. Like, I know you have a graphic design background. I'm just, everything we're looking at is just gorgeous. You always have such attention to detail.
But, and I appreciate that, but what that really represents is that I wasted a whole bunch of time trying to figure out the exact right purple gradient for this backdrop that I'm using here. But I appreciate that that attention to detail and wasted time has not gone unappreciated. So the rest of these all take advantage of Obsidian's like native text, and they all tap into text files that I can get access to, and then they use the information that you can see in those text files in order to do some dynamic things, which is really cool. So if I tap the current book button, and Bree is going to get a shout out here. I see Bree in the chat. If I tap current book, it jumps right into like the current file I've got on the book that I'm reading. And that's no big deal, right? That's not very complicated. Everybody knows, or it is pretty easy. And we can talk about exactly how to do it if you want in the AMA, to create a link to a specific file in Obsidian. But that's not actually what I'm doing. If I tap the books document and I tap book list, it actually draws from a specific text file from a list of books. And then it gives me this dynamic list. And you see at the top there is that first book that I had opened, run a reading group. That's the book representing Bree and the Knowledge Architectures book club that Bree and I are running. And then the rest of the list is a bunch of books that I've downloaded and got set up in Devonthink. And if I tap any of those buttons, I'm not going to do it right now, but if I tap the middle, open that book right up in Devonthink, and I can start reading right away. And that dynamic list is actually generated straight from a text file, from a note I keep in Obsidian. So the same thing is true for my projects list. And I didn't do anything, so this is where the demo might not go so perfectly. Go away. Okay. So if I tap the projects list, no, I knew this would happen. Shortcuts has this weird glitch where sometimes if you don't act on an action from the home screen, it sort of gives up and then you need to reboot the device. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go in here and tap the projects list. And so this is going to do something similar. It grabs a list of projects that I've got in Obsidian. I can show you what that looks like. And then from there, see, shortcuts is giving me trouble. From there, try it again. Down to Obsidian, click the projects button. It gives a dynamic list of projects that I keep. Okay, so it's a Kanban. This is the file that shortcut actually draws from. And what I did was I said, split up this file and give me a list of all of my projects. And the cool thing is that if I move these objects around in Kanban, then the shortcut that I just tapped will actually dynamically change. So I manage all of my projects, and I actually give, or I manage my projects, and I use Obsidian mostly as a project management tool, less as a knowledge management tool, which might be something we can talk about later. But if I manage my projects from here, it actually will dynamically change how that shortcut that I just launched shows. The list of projects that it'll show it, and the topmost one is the one that corresponds with the current project button over here. So it's a similar idea for the books. If I change the order of books in Obsidian and I tap the current book, then I will jump right into that first book on the list.
What you're showing, you have the advanced workflows that you've set up that lead you're creating an environment, and this is kind of a nice jumping off board, because if we look at your iPad screen, you have 8 different places that immediately take you to 8 different ways of thinking. And that's part of your information system, right?
You got it. That's the segue. So what I'm trying to show is that there is this home screen acts as a jumping off point, but there's one source of truth, right? Obsidian, and everything I keep in Obsidian is a representation of my world. It's a representation, and it's the same thing for all of you and anybody who's managing knowledge in these apps. It is a dynamic representation that helps you think about your world, organize it, and then use that to change the world around you. And so what I'm trying to do is use what I've got in Obsidian as a current source of truth. I don't have a physical bookshelf because all of my books are digital. And so instead I keep this digital bookshelf, and that one source, that one list of books that I'm currently reading is something that I don't have to worry about replicating in other apps. I don't have to open up a variety of apps to figure out, where the book is that I'm currently reading. I actually just keep that managed in Obsidian, and when I tap that current book button, it opens up the current book that I'm reading, and I can jump right in. And so one of the key concepts that I'm trying to play with here is what Nick just mentioned, this idea that you're actually representing thinking in these systems. And by managing one source of truth, by managing one set of information and dynamically drawing from that to do all kinds of different things, you're reducing what is called cognitive capacity, or you're reducing the need for you to have cognitive capacity. There's no thinking about what the next book is. It's just tap the current book button and jump right in. So the idea is to try to draw down the amount of effort it takes to get started and to get working on some of these things.
I will say this, though, just to put a little bit more spotlight on why this is so wild, and I think it ties into your integrated thinking environments, is because something like Obsidian and these environments, you're creating all these, like these are dashboards, and I think Guthrie said in the chat, it's a surrogate dashboard for Obsidian, and it's all this stuff is going to your single source of truth, and it's kind of hard to encapsulate the exciting brilliance that this time has brought upon us, where we can easily have a single source of truth after, years of being in the darkness with digital information and trying to make sense of scattered pieces absolutely everywhere. So I don't know. This is so cool.
Yeah. And I think the neat thing about all these tools is that they're, for the first time in a long time, putting things in the same place, bringing us as individuals, us as thinkers closer to our thoughts, which sounds kind of hokey, but if we get really good at it, and I think we are, just through using these tools and through developers building plugins that make it easier to do specific things, getting closer to thoughts is actually starting to matter. And I know that probably makes no sense, but hopefully through the rest of the conversation, we can sort of break that down a little bit more.
Getting closer to thoughts. Let's put a pin in that, because I want to hear more about this.
Getting closer to our representation of thoughts. And actually, maybe I can share one more thing before I shut up, and we can change gears a little bit. But a neat thing about this idea of integrated thinking environments is that, so we're thinking, we have all these ideas and arguments and project that we're trying to manage and so on, mostly in our heads and mostly spread sometimes over all kinds of Post-it notes or note files or whatever. And these new apps like Obsidian and Rome, have made it a little easier to realize that when you have a thought and then you represent it, you're actually creating sort of two different thoughts. You've got the thing that's in your head, and you've got the thing that you've put down on paper. And the closer you can make those two things to be the same, the lower the cognitive load it'll cost. Thank you, chat, for getting that. So the lower cognitive load you'll have in trying to keep two different representations of the world in place. And by recognizing that what you're doing when you're writing all these notes is actually creating what Nick has referenced as an information system. So you're representing your thoughts in a different place. You're letting that thing inform your thinking again, and you're letting it interact. So you're creating this idea of a second brain. I don't like, because I don't think we need two brains. Brains are quite complicated, and I have a lot of thoughts about that sort of metaphor. But you're certainly augmenting your cognition. You're certainly augmenting your ability to think through complex topics by spreading out your cognitive load and by increasing your cognitive capacity to have bigger thoughts.
This is foundational. Like thoughts. And yeah, I mean, that's why you're on here, is to share your wisdom with us from this rigorous perspective, this academic perspective that's also based in practicality with PKM. It's like this perfect mixture of the two, because what you're doing is in your studies is a lot of information systems, if I'm accurate. Okay.
Yeah.
And then combining that with this world that we're all here for, these ITEs, to use your term, like Obsidian and Rome, and that can augment this world, and that we can learn the lessons that you see every day through information systems, and how we can apply that with PKM. Yeah, it's great.
There's something there. Yeah. If I was going to talk a lot, I was going to switch over to a little drawing app and sketch out some ideas, maybe very briefly, to sort of explain some of the things that I just talked about. Information systems represent the world. They help inform a user about what the world contains, and they help you act on the world. And so that's what Nick and I are talking about when we say information systems. Information systems is actually a whole branch of management scholarship and practice. It's really old. And so I found it really funny when PKM started to get popular, sort of again, really, when PKM started to get popular about a few years ago, it wasn't being informed by information systems. And yet there's a whole bunch of study out there on exactly how we represent worlds in computers, in information systems. And that's kind of what I'm drawing on, those areas of scholarship and practice. And this might seem silly, but again, I'm just going to reiterate that when you have a thought in your head, and I realize my writing is not great, so hopefully this sort of gets you back to like a college math professor, and you're trying to scrutinize the board to figure out what exactly that X really represents. But when you have a thought in your brain, it's a little sketch of a brain, and then you actually put it down on paper or on digital paper in an ITE, in what we're calling an integrated thinking environment. Integrated thinking environment. Well, you're no longer actually talking about that thought. It's a representation of that thought. And that representation interacts with the thought that you had yourself. And so you never have the same thought twice. You never represent the same thought twice, because the thought's no longer the same, and neither are you, right? And I think a lot of what Nick has been practicing and linking your thinking and with maps of content and so on is actually kind of about this. It's about representing and breaking down the thinking that you're doing, and then letting that thinking provide you a map, right? And that's the inform angle over here. And then as you interact with that map and you manipulate it and you move it around, you're actually acting on it and you're changing what that thought is and advancing your thinking about a given topic area or a given issue or whatever.
That's just really wild, because I can only tell you from my experiences, my entry point into PKM has all just been kind of what I've needed to do without any structure, or basically, I think like most people, where you're just trying to get along in the world and solve your problems, and you're not really thinking about what you're doing and why. And so to hear you come and say, well, I mean, we know a lot of us have heard the phrase, what the map is not the territory.
The territory. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a representation, which you're just getting at. And it's that same thing. But if we don't think about it, we think it's the same thing. We think it is reality. We think,
right.
The word rock is rock, and it's exactly what it is. It's rock, but it's only a word that we're using to describe this object out there in the real world. And that rock and that rock aren't exactly the same. So they're
right.
representations. And what I like is how you're bringing that sort of mindset to what we're doing, which I'm sure is informed by information systems. And then it's looking at, that makes me think, like, to your point that you've said in some other things, what can that then inform us about how we design our own PKM systems, right, and the thoughts around that I'm kind of interested about.
Yeah. It's funny, this idea of an ITE is not a new one. I think that Doug Engelbart, one of the famous computer scientists from a long time ago, I think he was originally one of the progenitors of these concepts. But I think what people ran with as they started, so there were examples of ITEs, I think, through the ages, through the last few decades. But I think what they always did was they tried to overstructure. I think they tried to, give people this really complicated sort of interface where you had menus and lists and all sorts of different pieces. And they failed to recognize that people have been creating ITEs since, we started carving shapes in stone. We've been representing our thinking somewhere externally, using that to inform, and then using that to act and to shape the world around us. And so a very simple example might be like I forget if it's a tablet or the Stone of Hammurabi, one of the first pieces of policy ever written down, right? That was some king. The king decided that the world should be a certain way. The king represented his thinking on that in a given on a piece of stone. He put that somewhere where other people could see it and be informed by that policy. And then people had to shape their actions. And if you did certain things, you got thrown in a river because people thought you were a witch. So it wasn't necessarily a great sort of model necessarily for the world, but it was an early instance of an information system and of a thinking environment. But it wasn't integrated. In fact, it might not have even been considered an environment. What we're getting now are these note systems. We're getting this ability for everybody to sort of scratch their ideas down on stone and then interact with them. And the latest raft of apps, Rome and Obsidian and Logsec and Athens and give people these tools to be able to put things down on paper. And then instead of trying to add a lot of complexity, you can or a complication. You can add a lot of complication to it if you want. You can add a lot of, say, metadata fields and other kinds of ways of adding metadata to it. But most people just represent metadata through how they organize their notes, the folders and the tags you add to it, and then the links, the relationships you build between those. And those lead to a really kind of rich way of taking what might seem a basic concept, a note, and then giving it this rich relationship to all these other notes. And suddenly you've got that integration. And if you're given a software like Obsidian or Rome, you have an environment to play with it. So that's where my head is about all these things.
Yeah. And I really like that history about, how integrated thinking environments, because it does make me think. There was a video, I don't know if it was Apple or what, from 70s, 80s, where there's a business executive man. He's like at his desk and he's got a computer interface that he's interacting with.
To?
Yeah.
We'll have to find that. It's hilarious.
It is.
It was Apple. It was Apple. And the guy he's a researcher. So the guy, this is a concept tech piece. It was one of the only videos Apple's ever made, which is one of the reasons why it's a interesting piece of trivia. But this researcher sits down and he's like, give me the latest reports on the Amazon rainforest. And then the computer sort of like shows him this list and he like picks from them. And he's like, oh, I need to call Tracy on that. And he tells the computer to call Tracy. But it does provide this like really this neat representation of exactly how these pieces of information can fit together and how we as the thinker have the ability to interact with them and put them together in new things. So yeah, we'll find that video.
I'm curious. I have a few questions before we go into two of them. The one that's a little bit more straightforward, but not straightforward at the same time. What is a note? What is a note? Because I've been throwing out there just something that came to my mind is that it's a container of thought. And I was kind of curious to get your perspective on, what you think a note is.
Yeah, I think I'm going to fail you on this answer. I wrote a treatise sort of that I never published on like how we shouldn't be calling these things notes, because they're like a note in the real definition of the term is generally this like ephemeral thing that you sort of write on a strip of paper and throw away. And that's kind of a cruel representation of what these things are to us, because they're actually like, I had a baby recently. I'm a recent dad, and a lot of the thinking around our child was represented in notes, right? But like that's a really important thing. So to call it a note is almost sad. But yes, I guess if you get away from my dramatics, a note is a container of thought. It's a way of using writing, using verbiage to capture something you're thinking about. And we've been throwing around this term information systems, but really every single note is an information system. Every single note represents something in the world and allows you to it informs you later when you forget what your plan was. It informs you later. And then by interacting with that note and using its information to change something about the world, it's allowing you to act. So that might be another way of putting it. It's like a note is an information system, and it is an information system because of those three functions.
What do you think about early on in the Obsidian beta? We were talking a lot about maps of content as a term and having a really healthy conversation around if that was a good one or not. But I think overall, I love having the conversation about representations of different types of notes. If we go along and say like, okay, let's say they're notes just so we can communicate amongst each other. I find it so enlightening when someone talks about a different type of note. And someone invariably will say, well, that's just a note. They're all notes. Yes and no, because if we think about them differently, it's like expanding our vocabulary. We're able to approach a problem with this new tool all of a sudden. I mean, it's kind of like the opposite of 1984. When you cut down on vocabulary, you cut down on the ways that we can think. So if we expand on vocabulary, it seems like we can expand on the ways that we can think. That kind of ties into your Workbench plugin, among other things. But I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on, the vocabulary around PKM manage, like the vernacular around it. And if there are any ways that we should consider different types of notes.
Right. I mean, this might be a neat segue to talk about another concept from information systems, which is the idea of a conceptual model, which you might just want to use the phrase mental model. But one of the reasons I think Rome and Obsidian and so on have taken off, ITEs have taken off lately, is because a note can be anything. And that's one of the neat things about this like simple piece of text is like, you can write down, depending on what you write in it, it changes what it is. And so a conceptual model is an idea from information systems that defines how you structure reality in an information system, which sounds big. It's not. The idea is simply that, when you capture the world, when you capture something you're thinking about, or you're capturing an observation, you can only capture what is salient to you about that. Think about it. Let's use a metaphor. If you take a photo of a tree, and you're using a camera, then you're capturing what that tree looks like in the wavelengths of the camera. You can only capture that information. And sometimes you'll have EXIF metadata, so you'll be able to capture where the photo was taken, the kind of camera it was, and so on. But there's still a whole world that's an excerpt from a world. So the conceptual model of what you're capturing is, the visible wavelengths of that picture of a tree from that particular angle, and the metadata that was attached to the particular photo file that you captured. So all that to say, when we write down a note, every time we write down a note, we're actually using a conceptual model. We're actually saying, okay, in my head, here's what I'm thinking about. What's important and salient about that thing in order to represent it in this bit of text. And so you actually, every time you write a note, you're defining what type, the type of note, and you're doing it by the type of content you put in it. So actually one of my supervisors, or my supervisor in information systems, I'm a PhD candidate, his name is Jeff Parsons, and he wrote a paper a long time ago called The Tyranny of Classification. And the idea here is that when we represent things in information systems, we tend to do it by deciding first what the thing is. So we say, okay, I have what's a good example? I have a chapter from a book here, and I'm going to put it in my folder, which is like the main folder is library, then the subfolder is books, and the subfolder of that book of books is this book, and the subfolder is chapters, and then this is, and that's a crude example, but what if that idea, what if that thing is actually not a chapter of a book to you? What if you're capturing it as a key piece of your thesis? I don't know. Then you might want to put it somewhere else. And the problem is that by looking at where that thing is, you're defining what it is, and yet what it is from conceptually can be so many different things. And so this is why I think we've seen flat structures become really popular in note systems, because if you use links, you use maps of content, and you use tags and so on, instead of folders, you're not dealing with this tyranny of classification. You're not defining what something is by where we're putting it. We're actually letting it be itself, and then using the properties of that thing to decide what it is when we use it. And that was the point of the paper.
It's an almost agnostic way of approaching any bit of information. You're saying, I don't quite know who you are or what you are. I know you're definitely this right now for me, but I don't know for sure you're always that, and I don't want to always put you there. It's I don't know. It's kind of a curious way of approaching information that becomes knowledge as we start interacting with it.
Right. And here's one last piece on that. The real worry that Jeff had about classification and why it was tyrannical was because every time we classify something, every time we store something by thinking about what it is first, we actually go through, this goes back to cognitive load and cognitive capacity. We actually use features of our brain's ability to classify things to cut out parts of that thing, and we lose it. And so what Jeff was worried about was when we're capturing data, and he wasn't thinking about notes, but when we're capturing data about something in the world, and we decide, say, his work is often around crowdsourcing and observational crowdsourcing. So say you've got this project where you're looking at birds in the wild, and you have this system that lets people see a bird, and then they say, that's a robin. And so they say, I saw a robin. But what if that robin was sick, or what if it for some reason was doing a dance, and it's the first time ever that you've seen a robin do a dance, that any ecologist in the world has seen a robin do a dance. Well, your system only lets people say, I saw a robin. So you're actually missing all these interesting attributes of the observation. You're actually missing all these ideas that, because you're structuring too early, you are losing them. And so if we decide that a note about a book is to contain these kinds of information, then we aren't necessarily thinking about all the other pieces of information it might contain. And there's a tension there. There's an issue.
Yeah. To that point, I guess personally, what I attempt to do is, so bottom up doesn't allow for that structure when we make notes, and we put whatever's currently relevant to us about an idea, and we capture it into this container. But then as that stuff starts to come together, then we want to apply some structure, and hopefully it's a little bit earned at that point. And if that structure can remain fluid, then it allows conversations to continue, and we can take it in different directions. Theoretically and practically, I think that is a working model, depending on some people's use cases, which eventually I want to ask you about. You said something interesting, that you use project in Obsidian, you use it mainly for project management, which was surprising to me, because you're such a thinker. And I thought, where are you developing ideas? Or maybe you're just referring to it differently, because it seems like you're taking information, you're crafting it, you're working with it, you're refactoring it to make sense of things. So I guess, is it just semantics? Are you like, where are you doing your sense making, if not in something like Obsidian?
Honestly, I think it's something that it's just something that I'm bad at. Do you know anybody running any courses on exactly how to, practice
I may.
No,
I may.
yeah, it's just a lack of attention to it so far. When I started using these tools, I was looking for a way of managing my projects. And this is the tyranny of classification. What I'm calling a project is actually a deliverable that is a thought product, arguably, of a bunch of ideas that I'm putting together. And so it's maybe an example of what I was just talking about. But I still have a habit of writing big pieces, and that's what I'm talking about. Is like I'll have a project note, and the project note will contain the kind of writing that I'm doing and the tasks associated with it, and the other relevant projects and thought products that are going into it. And what I like about that is I used to use, I've used every task manager out there, and then I used to use every writing app out there, and so on. And what Obsidian gave me the power to do is put all those things in the same place. I don't have to go open an OmniFocus window with the project that I'm working on, with the list of tasks that I have, and look through that list of 20 tasks and identify where it fits in the paper I'm currently writing that's 20 pages long, and then open that thing in Word. All of that was too much for me. So instead, I have tasks where they are. Like I have tasks right next to the paragraphs that they're associated with, and I have thinking right next to that. So I do probably need to take linear thinking in order to figure out how to use Obsidian a bit more for knowledge management directly.
So I think for me, the way I filter that is it's semantics, I guess, for me, because you are doing idea development within your project management. It's just your use case, if I was to say it out loud, I might be incorrect. Your use case is so targeted and focused with what you want to think around this area. And so, and you want to have a deliverable there too. So you kind of have some sort of end. You don't know how you're going to get there, but you're eventually going to get to this place. And so it seems like, so it seems like it's still, it's doing what you need to. It's just very targeted, and you're doing all the sense making as you go along.
Yeah. And I do think I'm doing it backwards. Like I think I had a great chat with somebody on the Obsidian forum about this the other day, and people were very informative. Such a great place. But I'm still stuck in, like, I'm a PhD candidate. I have deliverables. I need to do a thesis, right? I need to write papers for conferences. And so the way my work tends to happen is like, I will be like, write thesis. And then the thesis gets backwards generated from there, instead of what I would like to do, which is I think the LYT model, which is like, here's all these ideas, here's how they kind of fit together, here's how they become interesting things. Oh, look, I've got a thesis, which is, I think that's the like natural approach. That's the more powerful approach. But unfortunately, the pressure deadlines is another tyranny.
The Zettelkasten and the Zonka Arend's approach that he kind of outlines the build. Well, hey, that's great. Pretty quickly, I think we should open it up to like some of the questions and hear from other people.
So the question from Michael was, what place does Devonthink have in your system? How is that distinct from Obsidian? I actually think Obsidian could be a replacement for Devonthink. I'm not quite there yet, but the more that the devs do to support sort of different files and allowing us to do more with different files, depending on your use case, you might be able to switch. If you're familiar with Devonthink, I'll explain what it is in a second, but you might be able to switch Obsidian in with Devonthink. So Devonthink is I think another kind of integrated thinking environment. And Nick, we actually didn't get into what integrated thinking environments were and why we were talking about that phrase. So maybe we need to go back there.
Yeah, feel free.
But it's a way. Devonthink is about 15 years old now. It's a really early Mac app that was really powerful, and it lets you put files in there. You can treat it like a note manager, similar to Obsidian and Rome and so on. But you can drive. One of the more recent updates they've done in Devonthink 3 was allow you to add custom metadata to individual files. So you can say, have a PDF and list metadata on top of the PDF about what kind of paper it is that as it fits into whatever the project you're currently working in. So it allows some more complicated metadata management that Obsidian I don't think will do anytime soon. But outside of that, you can store files in Devonthink, and you can store notes in it, and you can use it as a full text search engine of all those things. So it's quite powerful. And to answer Michael's question more simply, Devonthink indexes my Obsidian folder. So I published a plugin a couple of months ago called Devonlink, and it lets you open if you index your Obsidian folder in Devonthink, you can just use the scripts that I provided and the plugin to just like jump back and forth between them. So the exact same files that are in Obsidian are in Devonthink. Thank all of the developers who've come before us for making plain text files a thing. And Devonthink therefore adds a bunch of functions that once in a while I tap into. So I like Obsidian as the sort of quick moving, easy to navigate and organize system. And then Devonthink itself sits on top of that as a sort of database layer that lets me do some fun things with full text search and so on. And I'll store, if I've got a PDF, say, that I'm reading, I'll store all those in Devonthink and use direct links in Obsidian. Just out of habit, when I started using Obsi, it didn't have as great support for PDFs and so on. Nowadays, I might have done something differently. That's the short answer. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's pretty good. And then I see there's some sub questions, but I think we actually answered where Teresa, and she was kind of curious about how you use Obsidian primarily for projects versus knowledge. But I think we answered that you're actually kind of doing it, you're managing knowledge, but it's through the lens of projects. Is that fair enough to say?
Yeah, I think that's fair. To add to that a little bit, I follow Getting Things Done, copyright David Allen and Co. 2001, a little loosely. The way I think of it is like there are projects that sit within projects that sit within projects. So that's one of the things that I didn't like about classical task managers and how they approach project management is like there tends to be like sort of a super folder and then a project, and then after that it kind of starts to fall apart. But my write a thesis project is actually a part of the overall project of achieving, accomplishing a research stream, and then subparts of that thesis are write chapters, and subparts of those are run experiments. And so that's how Obsidian's linking tools help me think of these projects in a sort of different way from all those other task management tools. Is I'll have a project that to be accomplished needs all these other projects, and they're all linked together. So, but yes, they're all knowledge projects, so they're all driven from the kind of ideas that I write down right there in the text and so on.
And just having that phrase, like that's what I mean, those empowering phrases, a knowledge project. I know you're just kind of throwing that out there like casually, but that's a way to look at different types of projects. It's a knowledge project. Okay. How can I use this within Obsidian or, Roam or, Logsec? Excellent. So 2 options. I'll give you a path that you can choose here, Ryan, but you want to talk a little bit about ITEs or answer Joel's question?
I think I should probably define ITEs a bit more so that people aren't too scared of that idea. So an ITE is this idea that the notes apps that we're currently using actually provide a way, like IDEs, integrated development environments, help developers manage code associated with a given goal. ITEs help us manage thoughts. And the current raft of notes apps that we're all excited about, by Eleanor, the current set of apps that we're all excited about are actually ITEs, and they are because they allow you to navigate your thoughts more effectively than previous sets of apps. They allow you to organize those thoughts in new and interesting ways, like using links and metadata. They allow you to transform those thoughts by querying them and evolving them through writing and through a variety of different kind of plugins. And then the fourth thing that makes these notes apps ITEs is that they are highly extensible. You can customize them with the community's development with all the plugins and extensions that the community has developed. And so a very quick example of one of those ideas is I built and published yesterday or the day before what I call the qualitative analysis integrated thinking environment. And the idea is that if you're doing research that involves qualitative analysis, that is, you're reading text, you're deeply reading text, you're trying to code that text for ideas and for content, for topics and themes that it contains. Conventionally, you would use something like MaxQDA or Atlas.ti or NVivo, which are expensive, huge pieces of software. And I suspect that people often don't use many of the features in them. And so if your use case is relatively simple and you're not used to those apps, you might actually be able to get away with just using an Obsidian Vault. So that's what I did. I built out a Obsidian Vault that uses a set of specifically defined features in the vault, specific plugins, specific ideas, specific workflows, and then you can use that to accomplish this dedicated goal of doing qualitative analysis. So I think most of what we are actually talking about today is a specific type of ITE focused on knowledge management, right? Focused on managing a bunch of notes, but you can actually think of ITEs as a variety of other tasks, focused on a variety of other tasks. And so another example of that is Calhistorian, Mark Robertson's talked a lot in the various communities of these places about his history teaching Roam Vault, Roam graph. And that's a specific task that he has fine-tuned a Roam graph to do. And just another example of how these things can get specific, and through extension, they can get a lot richer. So that's an ITE.
Very nice.
yeah, I don't know if any, I'll post a link. I wrote this up in a more robust way. So if you want to review it, you can dive right into that blog post and feel free to email me or whatever.
Yeah.
It needs some JPEGs. It's kind of boring. It's all text right now, but
if you're listening to this conversation, then that article is required reading. I mean, you'll love it. I'm just saying, like, if you're here, you know you'll love it because it's really good and it's clear, and there's a nice NOTE framework in there as well, worth checking out.
Yeah. So now Joel's asked, Joel, you're not supposed to ask hard questions or be provocative. But Joel says, it sounds like you are saying that the modes and structures for accessing information are part of the information itself. To be provocative, don't we need to distinguish the work of structuring and curating from the actual work of developing content? I don't know. I'd like Joel's thoughts on this, obviously.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey.
When you were starting off, it seemed like you were talking a lot about corridors and connections to different thoughts. And it seemed to me that a lot of the emphasis was on how things are connected rather than the work done of actually developing the individual thoughts. But then at other times you seem to turn and say, well, no, actually, these are individual freestanding atomic thoughts, and they can be connected to anything. So I mean, it may be that both are true, and that's the paradox of all of this.
Yeah. Sorry, you're gonna say something else?
No, I'm just trying to provoke you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I have a good answer. I think it is the tension or the paradox that, sometimes you do need to be thinking about how things are structured. And other times you need to be in the weeds. Yeah, I don't know. Kind of lacking more contribution there. But it's an interesting, so actually I know what I'll draw on, and that is Joel Chan's ideas of janitorial work. I don't know if Joel's getting that from somewhere else, but this idea that sometimes you need to be a janitor with your information, and you need to actually be doing cleanup work, and you need to be sort of getting rid of the things that you don't need anymore and cleaning up the links and the metadata and the structures. And then other times you're actually doing the thinking. And I think Joel, if I'm correct, Joel Chan argues that janitorial work is the work, that actual process of doing the organizing and the fitting things together and the deleting is actually a really important part of getting through your thinking and of managing your ideas. Does that relate at all? Am I on the mark? What do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think something that Eleanor said, that classification is hard. That's partly because thinking is hard. But I think the tension is in when does the janitorial work or the work of curation become a matter of just getting fiddly with things. You're shuffling things around. You're saying like, oh, this relates to that. This reminds me of that. This is associated with that. And you spend all the time on the linking and not enough on the thinking.
Yeah.
At the same time, just having these atomic thoughts and not connecting them to one another is also a problem.
Yeah. So, okay. Thank you for pushing it a bit further. And this is actually maybe not such a hard question after all, because I have a strong opinion, but maybe a controversial one. And that is that knowledge innovation. So we've been talking about this stuff from under the guise of knowledge management, right? PKM is knowledge management. And I wonder, like, why the hell are we not, why are we managing knowledge? What's the point of managing knowledge? I actually think we should be thinking about it in terms of knowledge innovation. And I say that because my master's thesis was on the innovation process and on innovation skills and how we educate innovators. But the part of that contribution, part of that product was the development, merging of a bunch of different theories of innovation into a process. And I can link that. But the big picture idea is that every innovation, and first of all, innovation is anything that is new to the world, new to your context, or new to you. So innovation doesn't need to be this brand new giant idea that is like going to blow away the previous paradigms. Just realizing that you should wake up earlier in the morning might be an innovation if it depends on something that's something important to you. But all innovations are driven by what I called a prompt. So maybe you had a need, maybe you just had a spontaneous idea, that's cool too. Or maybe you had a question or a challenge that you're trying to resolve. And so there's a chain of events that happens between that prompt and then actually applying it, actually using whatever you do in between having the prompt and applying it to change the world, change your world, change your local world, or change the bigger world. And so I actually would argue that janitorial work, to bring it back, the janitorial work can be fiddly, can be useless if you're not driving it from a prompt, if you're not driving it from a good challenge, from a good question or a good sort of issue that you're trying to resolve. So I think we should be managing knowledge, and this is the controversial part. We should be managing knowledge for the purposes of innovation. We should be managing knowledge to try and respond to issues and problems and ideas that we have in our lives in order to do something different in the future, that or be more resolved in whatever we're doing the same, but it should be making a difference. It should be for some given purpose. So it's fiddly when you're doing it to procrastinate.
I love where this conversation has gone, because I think we're hitting on so many neat topics, and knowledge innovation, knowledge development, kind of those are, we could say, somewhat similar. And I think the broadest term is management that can fit it all. So that, unfortunately, that's what it's currently mostly called. But to your point, and I think where the most value is when people are using these tools for, as you're saying, innovation, for making new connections that bring meaning to their world, whether it's around them or internally. And it's, so yeah, I feel strong alignment with what you're saying there. And that, and also to that point, how janitorial work is both good and bad, depending on how it's approached and what the purpose around it is. It's fantastic if it's forcing you to think, not so much if you're just trying to clean up a bunch of metadata because you have a template and you're supposed to fill out 20 different metadata items that you forced upon yourself, but aren't really earned.
Yeah. Or if you're trying to avoid some other deadline, or yes, instead of drawing new icons on a home screen, you're trying to add specific metadata to a thing. Yeah.
Thank you, Joel, by the way. Wonderful, provoking question. And we're hitting the hour mark. The only thing is, I know we have more questions. We won't be able to get to them all, but there's also a walkthrough of your messy main vault where you possibly do some strange things. And I didn't want to make sure that we overlook that completely. Is that something you still want to share, or do you want to focus on the questions?
Yeah, so I think I shared that effectively through the talking about project management. One of the kookiest things that I do is I do sort of use symbols as a prefix for certain kinds of notes. So I use I just typed into the chat, a delta or a project symbol, a triangle, to indicate that something is a project note. And so I've got a lot of things in my vault that are just like plain text titles and descriptive titles. But then if something is a project, I use that, and that lets me use the quick switcher to very, very quickly filter only the projects that I'm working on. I've seen people use, just P colon or whatever instead, but I find it a really neat trick because it visually then shows what is a project. And I do some other things with status to show whether or not a project is open or closed. So actually, I might as well finish that thought. I keep typing. I use that symbol, open, and then project to indicate that a project is still running. It's not something that I've closed out. And then I use like a closed dot and a triangle to indicate that something is finished and I'm not really working with it. So it gives me a really quick way of filtering when I'm using quick switcher.
I'm interested in this a lot. And as it happens, Joel, who I was just talking with Joel a couple of days ago, I'm very interested in the conventions that might take root with us trying to solve, a diverse set of problems in our own worlds. And so I think you're onto something with the option 8 on a Mac with that bullet. Joel also mentions that. That's a really good one. I'm speaking for you, Joel. So this is all option / you brought that one up. And you also, Joel brought up the Spanish question mark, which are all Unicode, like, compliant, and, every system can read that well, from my understanding. So I'm nice.
The Unicode coffee cup. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah. So I'm excited to see where that goes as well, and see what kind of conventions naturally start to emerge in the next, few years. Everyone will be unique and different, but I'm just kind of curious to see what catches on.
So I think no, well, emoji are fine, Josh, to quickly answer. You just have to check the services and the operating systems you're using. So Dropbox, for instance, will often fight against emoji, and yet for some reason doesn't have a problem with these Unicode characters that we're typing in. But I don't go restructure your entire graph or your entire note system without making sure your file isn't rejected by whatever you're using. I will quickly say, what was I going to say? I'm wondering now if there's better ways of doing this. So I've been using this as sort of workaround, really, for a way of filtering files when I'm quickly opening. And in that article that I posted earlier on ITEs, I talked about this concept of Softerware. Really, these like very defined techniques are a kind of level on top of software that we're using to accomplish certain goals. And I think what we'll see as these apps keep developing and as the plugins, the ecosystem keeps getting richer and richer, is we'll see people will take these ideas that users are using as a workaround, and they'll actually create plugins and extensions that help accomplish those things without needing the hacky workarounds. So I would love to just like tap a button to open only my project files and use metadata in the project files to dictate that, because it is a pain in the ass to use these different symbols and to explain them to people whenever they ask about them. Yeah. And so I think I think we'll see this sort of cycle where users do these neat techniques and then developers see them and say, hey, we can do that a little better and build it into the software with this plugin. So that's a dream.
That would be nice. And this hits on two things. And the reason I was talking with Joel is because I hope to do a lighthouse with him more so like in October or November timeframe. But because he's huge into autocomplete, and as far as retrieve, again, I'm speaking for you, so I'm going to cut it short, Joel. But just the value how one symbol can help with your auto completion and retrieval. But then the other side of it is collaborative purposes, where if you're working with people in this collaborative environment, can we agree upon symbols? So we can communicate within a small team or whatever, that this symbol means this, but to your point, that's where smart developers might solve the problem again, without having the need for us to rely on such things. And we'll be very interesting to see how that gets solved, the collaborative questions.
Yeah, they're very unresolved in my mind. I think like lots of people are excited about collaboration and about multiplayer integrated thinking environments. And I think we're going to get there, but it's the software that needs to be resolved before the software can actually really work. It's the like techniques and ways of working together and it goes back to that idea about information systems, right? If I'm representing a thought, and you talked about this, Nick, if I'm representing a thought about a rock and it's actually a different actual real world thing that I'm talking about, and you think it's your real world version of a rock, we're not going to agree, even though we think we're agreeing. And you know, that can get, it can seem subtle, but then it could run into some major issues. And I know also Joel Anderson is working on that too, these kinds of collaborative efforts. Do you believe consciousness emerges from integrated information? I try not to think too much about those kinds of ideas. I think that, actually, I do have a strong opinion on that, and that is that consciousness to me is, or at least sentience or whatever, can only come from abduction, can only come from this like sort of jump in logic that we actually can't really get computers to do quite yet, at least. I don't know if we'll ever get there. I've got some skepticism about AI and machine learning's ability to do abduction, to do what Charles Sanders Peirce talked about as like this jump from inference to a possible solution and then testing that solution. So if any people in the chat are philosophers, feel free to tear me apart on that. But that's kind of where I'm thinking about sentience and consciousness. It's all about that innovation idea. It's all about driving to change the world and change the universe. So that's where I think consciousness needs to come from. Integrated information is part of that, but that abduction, everybody in this room is doing abduction constantly because they are integrating information, and that from that integration, you are having some separate idea that doesn't come directly from it. It's a gestalt effect. And we're not quite there, and just piling information together is not the same as the gestalt of looking at it differently.
Abduction, would that be fairly similar to saying a phrase that's unscientific like lateral thinking? I mean, is that sort of in the same ballpark? Abduct away?
Yeah, it's related. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I actually wrote a post that I can't even remember the details of it. I wrote a post that I can link about what abduction is and why it might matter. Let me pull that up and throw it in the chat. But it's a big issue to me that we don't often think about when we get excited about AI and so on. I think there's a lot to be resolved about abduction. It's also related to intuitiveness. So there, I sent the link. Tanuj asked about systems thinking. Systems thinking is seeing the world as an interconnected set of phenomena, and not as, it's actually related to that gestalt idea. So a system behaves differently. A system is a set of phenomena that if you looked at face value, they look like a bunch of things that sort of sit together, but then as they interact, they lead to emergent dynamic behaviors that are hard to predict and guess at. My main wheelhouse is actually systems thinking and systemic design. It's a way of looking at the world and at complex phenomena and trying to develop strategies to change them. Do I integrate it into my ITE workflow? I think you're seeing some pieces of systems thinking in the ways that I'm thinking about these ideas, that when you write a note, the note doesn't sit. When you write a note and you link it to a bunch of other notes, the note is no longer just itself. It's actually what it represents based on the context of all these other pieces. So that's a quick example, but I'm not very deliberate about it. So, Tanush, if you have more ideas about systems thinking and how it works with ITEs, then by all means, write away and publish it and share with me. I'd love to read it. John Crosby asks, what is your mental squeeze or pain point threshold in transforming captured content from a developing state to an evergreen note? I think, John, that goes back to my current restrictions in my PhD candidate life, where I don't get to do that because I have to start with that idea of what the evergreen note is, as in a paper, a conference paper, a thesis, whatever. And so I really start with what that objective is. And my practice right now really just involves a lot of cognition, a lot of things that are happening in my head as I, care for my baby and go for a walk and stuff, and deep reading. So reading articles and thinking about these issues. I really do want to, as I've hinted at, follow the LYT approach at least a little bit and get better at that idea of having all these nascent concepts and then putting them together. But I don't think I'm very good at it. Let me see. I think I can quickly answer these next three, and then maybe I'll have to stop. So I don't use a lot of front matter or metadata, but I'd like to use it more. Actually, the only thing I really use it for right now is I use a service called Blot to publish my blog, blot.im. It's an excellent service that you can use with Dropbox or Git, and it allows you to take a set of markdown files and hit essentially publish them just as a blog post. And so Blot recently announced both double bracket linking, so wiki linking, and support for fenced metadata at the top. And so I use Blot's sort of pieces there to add summaries and so on, but I don't use actual metadata very much. Michael asked how I'm submitting to the tyranny of classification. I think systemically is the answer, to go back to what I just said about Tanush. I don't actually worry too much about how these things fit together. I just sort of, sometimes the only time I use a folder is when I've got a bunch of assets that fit together. So I need to write a document, like a docx file, and I have a PDF and I have a bunch of images that I've made for it. So I'll put all those in the same folder and then put that folder, in notes. But that's the only thing I really do. I don't worry otherwise about how my things fit together. And then I'll naturally use links to fit things together. And I use a kind of approach like maps of content in order to organize these things. You saw my projects file. That's the Kanban board. That's like the main organizing scheme that I use across the whole thing.
Thank you for your graciousness there, Ryan. I mean, you hit most of them. Questions will keep flooding in, and they are great questions. So apologies that we can't get to them all, but they will be saved. And then on the side, maybe they can be addressed offline.
Yeah,
but
I mean, I'll say this: I have limited access to my inbox these days. But if you write me, and then if you're really keen, you can keep writing me, and eventually I might write you. I will try not to feel too bad about not replying, but if I get the chance to respond, and you're really keen on dealing with some of these things, then by all means, reach out. I'll post my email.
Very awesome of you. Well, hey, let's give Ryan one more raised hand Zoom round of applause. So if you can see all those hands. If you have the participants pane open, yay. No, but seriously, like, this was so enriching and enlightening. It's overdue too. I know that we've wanted to talk for a while, and I'm glad that we're able to do it this way, because it's really enriching to get everyone's thoughts and feedback as we go. It's like this, I don't know, it's just a great learning environment. And I think it was handled fairly good with the webinar format, decent enough where you could share.
The demo went perfectly.
Right. Yeah. As always. But yeah, that's another thing. You have those amazing icons, and I know those are custom to you. But if I'm just kind of curious, do you have?
Yeah.
Okay.
When I write up the shortcuts and how they work, I will gladly share them with the icons. The icons are sort of half drawn by me, and half of the like little colorful bits are taken from FreePic, which is a free icon service. Freepic.com. Please don't sue me, FreePic. But yeah, I'll share them.
It's awesome that in each background, the icon background, it's different. It's not like you just used one. You reposition the background. So I mean, that's attention to detail, and that shows in all the work that you do.
Procrastination.
That too. But like your website, everything you do has a certain level of care, like a master craftsman. I always think about like Renaissance Italy, but yeah, you'd be the master crafts person making, sculptures and spending years to make it just right.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. No, I don't know if that's a good thing, but I'll take it as a compliment.
Working on multiple projects, spending years making it just right. So because your output's very high too. So yeah.
I'm glad it looks like that. To the whole audience, it doesn't feel like that most of the time.
Anything we missed or anything you'd like to say? Last words?
I don't think so. Thanks everybody for the attention. Thanks for bearing with me as I screwed up shortcuts. But yeah, if you have anything else, feel free to write it.
Thanks again, Ryan, and bye everyone. Thanks for being here and making this umami experience as full of a mouthfeel as it certainly was. All right, we'll see ya.
Thanks all. See ya.